The late afternoon sun slanted through the curtains of the Carter family living room. Evelyn sat on the couch, her hands trembling as she held a stack of papers she hadn't seen before. The words blurred in her tired eyes: quitclaim deed, transfer of ownership. Her name, Evelyn Carter, printed alongside Jacob's. A blank line waited for her signature. Her chest tightened. Jacob, sweet Jacob, her youngest, barely 20. He would never know what this meant unless someone told him. And someone had. She looked up. Michael stood near the fireplace, tall arms crossed like a man sure of himself. Next to him, Emily leaned forward with that smile, perfect for the world outside, sharp as glass inside this house. Mom, Emily said, tapping the papers as if explaining to a child, you don't need this house anymore. We'll take care of everything. Michael added quickly, it's just for the future, Mom. You shouldn't have to worry about things like this. The words cut deeper than Evelyn expected. This house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was where Richard had carried her over the threshold, where her children's heights were still etched into the kitchen door frame, where birthdays had been sung and Christmas mornings smelled of cinnamon. Don't need this house? It was her anchor, the last piece of her life with Richard. Her hands stopped shaking. She looked at Emily, her voice clear and steady. You're wrong, Emily. I don't need this house, but you will need a lawyer. The color drained from Emily's face. Even Michael froze, as if hearing his mother's strength for the first time. Evelyn rose, her knees aching but her back straight. She set the papers carefully on the table. Do you think I don't know what this means? She said. That I wouldn't notice when my son's name is on papers I never agreed to? Jacob, sitting in the corner, blurted out, Mom, I didn't know. Michael said it was just paperwork. I swear I didn't understand. Enough. Evelyn's voice was sharp. The room fell silent. She looked at them one by one, her eldest son avoiding her gaze, her daughter-in-law pale, her youngest caught in the middle. This house is not yours to take, not today, not ever. She turned and walked out, leaving the papers where they lay, leaving her family in silence. For the first time in years, Evelyn didn't feel weak. She felt something stronger, resolve, and that was the beginning. When Evelyn shut the door to her bedroom that night, the house felt too big. The walls, once warm with noise, pressed in around her. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands still tingling from clutching the papers. Her eyes fell on the empty armchair by the window, Richard's chair. It had been there for more than 30 years, its fabric worn thin, its cushions molded to the shape of his body. She closed her eyes and was back in that morning 5 years ago. It was March, gray and damp. Richard had been reading the newspaper, a mug of coffee steaming beside him. He was humming, a little off-key as always when his hand slipped, the paper sliding from his fingers. By the time Evelyn reached him, the life had drained from his face. One breath there, the next gone. A heart attack, sudden and merciless. She remembered the sirens, the hospital lights, the sterile voice of the doctor saying, I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter. She remembered clinging to his hand, still warm, and whispering, don't leave me yet, but he had. In the weeks that followed, the house became a mausoleum. His scent lingered on the pillows she refused to wash. His coffee mug sat untouched on the kitchen counter. The chair by the window remained as if waiting for him to return, and she was alone. Michael visited, but always in a rush. Sophie called from her city apartment, her voice brisk, already moving on with her life. Only Jacob, still in high school then, seemed to notice how the silence hollowed her out. He brought her tea, sat with her on the porch, asked about his father even when it made them both cry. To keep them afloat, Evelyn took on more hours at the grocery store. At night, she typed reports for a local office, squinting through tired eyes. She juggled bills, scraped pennies, stretched meals. She sold the old car Richard had loved just to pay Sophie's tuition. When Michael wanted to start his business, she gave him what little Richard had left behind, telling herself this was what Richard would have wanted. Every sacrifice was folded neatly into the walls of this house. The mortgage she paid off year after year, the roof she repaired with money she didn't have, the nights she patched Jacob's sneakers so he wouldn't be teased at school. This house was not just where she lived. It was the proof she had held her family together when everything else was falling apart. So when Emily's voice had cut through the living room that afternoon, you don't need this house anymore, it wasn't just arrogance. It was an insult to every night Evelyn had stayed awake, every moment she had chosen her children over herself. She rose from the bed and walked to the hallway where the family pictures lined the wall. Richard's smile stared back at her from the largest frame, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. Next to it, snapshots of birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings, and summers in the backyard with sprinklers and laughter. She touched the glass gently. "This is ours," she whispered, "not theirs." Her fingers lingered on Michael's graduation photo. He had been so proud that day, tossing his cap into the air, looking at her as though she'd hung the moon. How had that boy become the man who stood beside Emily, ready to strip her of the one thing she had left? Evelyn closed her eyes and inhaled slowly. She could almost hear Richard's voice, steady and reassuring. "You've done enough, Evie. You've carried them farther than they know, but you cannot let them take everything from you." The tears came hot and angry. She pressed her forehead against the cool wall, clutching the photo frame. She remembered the vow she had made at Richard's graveside. "I will protect them, no matter what it costs me." She hadn't realized then that one day, the danger would come not from the world outside, but from within her own family. Downstairs, she could hear muffled voices, Michael and Emily talking, their words indistinct but their tones sharp. She knew they thought she would bend, that she would sign the papers to keep peace. For years she had been the one who yielded, who gave more than she had, who never asked in return. But standing there in the dim hallway, surrounded by the faces of the people she had raised, Evelyn felt something shift. The woman who had buried her husband, who had worked 2 jobs, who had kept 3 children clothed and fed, was not a woman easily erased. She straightened the picture frame on the wall, then she whispered into the silence of the house, "I kept my promise, Richard, and I'll keep it again. This home will not be taken from me." The chair by the window waited quietly in her bedroom. Empty, yes, but not abandoned. And Evelyn, for the first time in years, felt the weight of her grief harden into resolve. The next morning, Evelyn rose before the sun, as she always did. Habit had become her armor. She brewed coffee, the bitter scent filling the quiet kitchen, and stood at the counter staring out the window at the yard Richard once mowed every Saturday. The grass had grown wild, but she told herself it didn't matter. What mattered was keeping everything else standing. After Richard's death, every day had become a list of sacrifices. Evelyn had never spoken of them aloud, what mother did. It was simply what needed to be done. Michael had been the first. He came to her 6 months after the funeral, his voice low, his eyes restless. "Mom, I found a space to start my business. I've got the plan, I've got the drive, but the bank, they won't loan to me without collateral. They want more security." Evelyn had still been working double shifts at the grocery, exhaustion clinging to her like a second skin. She wanted to say no. She wanted to remind him of the mortgage still heavy on her shoulders, the tuition for Sophie, the groceries that never seemed enough. But Michael's face reminded her of Richard, proud, determined, certain he was meant for more. So she dipped into the savings Richard had left her, the small cushion meant for emergencies. She slid the check across the kitchen table, her hand shaking. Michael's relief was instant. "You won't regret this, Mom. I'll pay you back, I promise." She nodded, swallowing the ache in her throat. But months passed, then years. The promise faded, replaced by silence. She never pressed him. A mother does not ask for her children's debts. Sophie was different. At 20, she was restless, eager to break free of their small town. She called Evelyn late one night from her cramped apartment, tears running down her voice. "Mom, my roommate's moving out. I can't make rent alone. If I can't pay, I'll lose the place. I'll lose everything I've worked for." Evelyn looked at the stack of unpaid bills on her counter. Her hands shook as she reached for her checkbook. She told Sophie not to worry, that she'd send the money in the morning. When she hung up, she sat in the dark kitchen until dawn, the silence pressing harder than ever. Jacob, her youngest, was still in high school when Richard died. He was the only one who still lingered at the dinner table, the only one who asked how she was. Evelyn promised herself he would not go without. She worked late shifts, bought him the basketball shoes he wanted even when she had to skip her own doctor's appointment. She made sure his college fund remained untouched, even if it meant wearing the same winter coat for 7 years straight. The sacrifices piled up quietly, like bricks no one else noticed. Michael expanded his business. Sophie moved into a better apartment. Jacob went off to college with tuition paid. And Evelyn kept carrying the weight, saying nothing. Over time, her silence became dangerous. The children began to expect it. Michael stopped mentioning repayment. Sophie stopped asking if Evelyn could manage. Even Jacob, sweet Jacob, grew used to his mother's constant giving. There was one night, a year after Richard's death, when Evelyn collapsed at the kitchen table, her head swimming from exhaustion. She woke to Jacob shaking her shoulder, his face pale. "Mom, are you okay? Should I call someone?" She smiled weakly, pushing his hand away. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just tired, always tired." And that was the truth. She was always tired, but mothers don't complain. Mothers hold the world up, even when it breaks their backs. The house bore witness to it all. The patched roof, the squeaky steps Richard once promised to fix, the leaky faucet Evelyn learned to repair herself. Every corner held proof of her endurance. Yet somehow, in her children's eyes, the sacrifices faded into the background. They stopped seeing the effort behind the meals, the strain behind the checks she mailed, the loneliness behind her silence. They grew accustomed to her strength, mistaking it for endless supply. And so, when Emily came into the picture with her polished smile and clever whispers, it wasn't hard for her to convince them that Evelyn didn't need the house anymore. That the woman who had given them everything could simply give this too. Standing in the kitchen that morning, Evelyn wrapped her hands around the warm coffee mug and felt the old ache rise in her chest. She thought of Michael's promises, Sophie's tears, Jacob's soft voice. She thought of all the ways she had bled herself dry so they could stand taller. And now they were ready to take the last piece of her. She closed her eyes and drew a long breath. For years she had survived on sacrifice. But sacrifice, she realized, could also become a cage. The first changes were small, so small Evelyn almost convinced herself she imagined them. One Sunday morning, Emily stood in the living room, hands on her hips, her eyes scanning the furniture like a realtor judging a property. "These couches are so outdated," she said casually, brushing invisible dust from her jeans. "Don't you think, Mom, maybe it's time for something more modern?" Evelyn looked at the floral couches, their fabric worn but still sturdy. Richard had chosen them years ago, insisting they felt like home. To Evelyn, they weren't just furniture. They were where Jacob built Lego castles, where Sophie fell asleep with her books, where Michael sprawled with homework across his lap. But Evelyn only nodded softly. "If you think so, Emily." A week later, new leather sofas appeared in their place. The old ones were gone, whisked away without a word of farewell. Evelyn stood in the doorway that evening, the unfamiliar smell of polished leather choking her throat. She wanted to ask where her couches had gone, but Emily was already explaining the good deal she'd found, how much better the room looked. Michael nodded along, proud. Evelyn kept silent. Then it was the kitchen. "These cabinets are falling apart, Mom. It's really unsafe. I'll call someone to come renovate." Before Evelyn could protest, contractors arrived with hammers and drills. The kitchen she had cooked in for decades, where she'd baked birthday cakes and stirred Richard's favorite stews, was stripped bare. Evelyn sat in the corner, clutching her apron, the sound of demolition echoing through her bones. When the work was finished, Emily beamed. "Doesn't it look amazing? So bright, so fresh." Evelyn forced a smile, though all she saw was emptiness where her memories had been carved into the wood. Soon, it wasn't just furniture and walls, it was her clothes. "Mom, maybe you should let me take you shopping. These dresses, well, they're a little dated, don't you think?" It was her friendships. "Those women from your book club, they don't really care about you, they just gossip. Why waste your time?" It was her choices at the grocery store. "Do you really need this brand of coffee? It's too expensive. You should stick with the store brand." Each comment was dressed as concern, each suggestion disguised as kindness. And Evelyn, weary from years of giving, afraid of causing waves, swallowed her protests one by one. The final blow came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Evelyn had gone to the bank to withdraw cash for her granddaughter's birthday gift. When she opened her wallet, it was empty. Confused, she checked her purse. No debit card. She hurried home and found Emily in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone. "Emily, have you seen my card?" Evelyn asked, her voice thin. Emily didn't look up. "Oh, I have it. I'm managing the expenses now, remember? It's easier this way. What did you need it for?" I wanted to buy a gift for Lily's birthday." Emily sighed, finally meeting Evelyn's eyes with a look that carried pity and disdain. "We already got her something from the whole family. You don't need to waste money on extras, Mom. At your age, you really shouldn't be spending on whims. Evelyn froze, at her age, as if her love for her granddaughter had an expiration date, as if she were no longer capable of deciding how to use the money she had earned with her own hands. That night, Evelyn lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her house was changing around her, piece by piece, until it no longer felt like hers. The decisions were no longer hers. Even her money was no longer hers. The laughter of Emily and Michael drifted up from the living room, muffled by walls that once felt safe. Evelyn turned on her side, clutching the empty space where Richard should have been. This was her house, her life, her sacrifice. Yet somehow she had become a guest inside it. And the worst part was that nobody else seemed to notice. 2 weeks later, Evelyn stood in front of the boutique on Main Street, her eyes pressed to the window. A pale blue dress, no bigger than her granddaughter, hung from the display. Lily had always loved blue, the shade of the sky just before dusk. Evelyn could picture her twirling in it, hair flying, laughter spilling into the air. She reached into her purse, fingers fumbling for her card. Nothing. She opened her wallet, already knowing what she would find, empty space where bills once were. Her chest tightened. She had forgotten. There was nothing left that belonged to her. She stood frozen for a long moment, staring at the dress. Behind the glass, it almost seemed to mock her. At Lily's party that Saturday, Evelyn arrived with a tray of cupcakes she had baked from scratch. It was all she could offer. Children ran through the yard with balloons, their laughter rising above the chatter of adults. Evelyn held her tray tight, wishing it didn't feel so small in her hands. Lily rushed over, her eyes bright. "Grandma, where's my present?" The words sliced through Evelyn like a blade. She forced a smile, her throat dry. "Sweetheart, I didn't bring one this year, but I made these for you." She lifted the cupcakes with a trembling smile. Lily's smile faltered, confusion flickering in her eyes before she nodded politely, as children are taught to do. "Thanks, Grandma." She ran off toward the other gifts piled high on a table, wrapped in glittering paper and ribbons. Evelyn's heart sank. For 12 years she had never missed a gift. A doll, a book, a necklace, always something chosen with love. And now she was empty-handed. Michael raised his glass in a toast, Emily by his side, radiant in her tailored dress. Evelyn sat alone on a folding chair at the edge of the yard, the laughter of children swirling around her like echoes she no longer belonged to. She bit into one of her own cupcakes, the sweetness thick and heavy in her mouth. It tasted of failure. Later that evening, after the guests had gone, Evelyn lingered in the kitchen, stacking paper plates into the trash. Emily breezed in, her perfume trailing behind her. "Great party, wasn't it?" she said, rinsing a glass. "Lily loved the bike we got her. It was the perfect gift." Evelyn kept her eyes on the sink. Emily continued, her tone casual but sharp at the edges. "I noticed you didn't bring anything. Honestly, Mom, it's better this way. Kids don't need too much stuff. Besides, at your age, it's easier if you just leave the decisions to us." Something inside Evelyn cracked. She turned slowly, her hands wet, her voice low. "You think being a grandmother ends when you decide it does? You think love has an expiration date?" Emily blinked, surprised by the steel in Evelyn's voice. For once, she had no quick reply, but Michael walked in, draping an arm around his wife's shoulders. "Mom, don't be upset. Emily's right. You don't need to worry about these things anymore. We'll handle it." "We'll handle it." The words echoed as Evelyn gripped the counter for balance. She had given Michael her savings, Sophie her rent money, Jacob his education. She had carried them all, silently, through years of sacrifice. And now, in return, she wasn't even trusted to buy her granddaughter a dress. That night, back in her room, Evelyn opened the closet where Richard's suit still hung untouched. She pressed her face into the fabric, inhaling what faint scent remained of him. "I tried, Richard," she whispered, tears soaking the cloth. "I gave them everything, and somehow it still isn't enough." Her sobs filled the empty house, muffled only by the walls that had once protected her. She had thought the loss of Richard was the worst pain she could endure. She was wrong. The worst pain was being erased, piece by piece, by the very family she had built. The night after Lily's birthday, the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea. The lights from the backyard still glowed faintly through the window where balloons sagged and paper plates lay scattered. She heard Michael's footsteps before she saw him. He walked in, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, looking every bit the successful man she had hoped he would become. For a moment, Evelyn saw her boy again, the one who once brought her dandelions from the yard, his hands grubby but his smile proud. "Michael," she said softly, "can we talk?" He glanced toward the hallway where Emily's laughter drifted faintly from upstairs. Then he sat across from her, rubbing his forehead. "Sure, Mom, what's wrong?" Evelyn hesitated. Words crowded her throat, but she forced them out. "I don't recognize my life anymore. The house, the money, even the choices I used to make, they don't belong to me now. I wanted to buy Lily a gift, but I couldn't. Emily has my card, she has everything, and you let it happen." Michael's jaw tightened. "Mom, you're overthinking this. Emily's just trying to help. You don't need the stress." "Help?" Evelyn's voice trembled, not with fear, but with anger. "Do you call it help when I can't touch my own money? When I sit at my granddaughter's birthday empty-handed for the first time in 12 years?" Michael shifted uncomfortably. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" Evelyn pressed. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks as if your wife has taken control of everything I worked for, and you've stood by silently." He looked away, his silence louder than words. Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes glistening. "I carried you through nights when I didn't know if the lights would stay on. I gave you my savings so you could chase your dreams. I fed you when I was hungry, Michael. And now you sit in my kitchen and tell me I don't understand my own life?" He slammed his palm on the table, startling her. "Stop it, Mom. Don't make Emily the villain. She's been holding this family together while you—" He caught himself, biting down on the words. Evelyn's heart stopped. "While I what?" she whispered. Michael rubbed his temple, his voice lowered. But the sting remained. "You're stuck in the past. Dad's gone. You can't cling to every old thing like it's sacred. The house, the dishes, the way you spend money, it's all outdated. Emily's just trying to move us forward." Tears burned Evelyn's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Forward?" she said bitterly. "Forward means erasing me? Forward means treating me like I'm useless?" Michael exhaled, frustration written across his face. "Mom, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Emily is doing what's best for everyone. Why can't you see that?" For a long moment, neither spoke. The clock ticked on the wall, steady, merciless. Evelyn searched her son's face for the boy she had raised, the boy who once promised he'd take care of her when she grew old. But all she saw was a man who no longer belonged to her. She rose slowly, pushing the chair back. "I see it now," she said quietly. "I see where you stand." Michael looked at her, guilt flickering in his eyes, but he said nothing. Evelyn walked out of the kitchen, her hands trembling, her chest hollow. Upstairs, Emily's laughter floated down again, sharp and victorious. And for the first time, Evelyn understood the truth that had been creeping toward her for months. She was alone in this house. That night, Evelyn barely slept. She lay in the dark, the sound of Michael's raised voice still echoing in her ears. The betrayal stung sharper than she thought possible. It wasn't Emily's cruelty that hollowed her. It was her own son's silence, his willingness to look away while his wife chipped away at the life Evelyn had built. By dawn, her decision was made. She could no longer wait for her children to remember who she was. She would remind them herself. She showered, dressed in her navy skirt and cream blouse, the ones Richard used to say made her look put together, and pulled her coat from the closet. She stood before the mirror, her reflection pale but steady. For the first time in years, she saw not a weary widow, but a woman who still had fight left in her. At 9 o'clock sharp, she dialed a number she had avoided for years. The voice on the other end was warm, tinged with surprise. "Evelyn, my God, it's been forever." "Patrick," she said, her voice breaking slightly. I need your help." There was no hesitation. "Say no more. Meet me at my office this afternoon." Patrick Hayes had been Richard's closest friend, his partner in law school, the best man at their wedding. Evelyn hadn't spoken to him much after Richard's death. It hurt too much to see someone who carried pieces of her husband's laughter. But now, walking into his downtown office, she felt a flicker of safety she hadn't known in years. Patrick rose from behind his desk, older now, hair more silver than she remembered, but his eyes kind. He hugged her firmly, then guided her to a chair. "Tell me everything," he said, and she did. She told him about the furniture disappearing, the kitchen being gutted, the friends she no longer saw. She told him about the bank account, the missing debit card, the humiliation of standing at her granddaughter's party with empty hands. She told him about the papers left on the table, about Emily's cold words and Michael's defense of them. Patrick listened without interruption, his brow furrowed deeper with every detail. When she finished, her hands were clenched in her lap, her throat raw. He leaned back slowly. Evelyn, what you're describing is financial abuse. It's not just unkind, it's illegal. Emily has no claim to your assets, not unless you sign them over, did you? Evelyn shook her head quickly. No, but Jacob, he almost signed something, and they tried to convince me. Patrick's expression hardened. That stops now. Evelyn, you need to gather evidence. Documents, recordings, anything that shows Emily's manipulation. And you need to secure what still belongs to you. Do you have access to your accounts? Her cheeks burned. She has my card. She manages the bills. Patrick sighed, but not with judgment, with resolve. Then we'll fix that. I'll help you open a new account in your name only. You'll move what's left immediately, and we'll start building a case, quietly. Evelyn swallowed hard. A case against my own family? He met her eyes. Against anyone who's stealing your life. Richard would want you protected, Evelyn, you know that. The mention of Richard's name steadied her. She could almost hear her husband's voice, calm and certain. Don't let them take what we built, Evie. She nodded. All right, what do I need to do? Patrick pulled out a notepad. Keep a record of everything. Write down conversations. Record if you can. Gather bank statements, receipts, any paperwork they've left around. The more, the better. And Evelyn, don't let them suspect you're fighting back. Let Emily think you're still the quiet, grateful mother-in-law she believes you to be. Evelyn's lips curved into something unfamiliar, almost a smile. She'll never see it coming. When Evelyn left Patrick's office, the city air felt sharper, clearer. The weight on her chest hadn't lifted, but it had shifted. She was no longer just carrying grief, she was carrying purpose. Walking to the bus stop, she clutched her purse tightly, her mind racing. For years she had survived by sacrificing, by bending, by staying silent. But sacrifice had brought her here, standing on the edge of losing everything. Not anymore. As the bus pulled up, Evelyn stepped aboard with her head high. She was still a mother, still a widow, still tired. But now she was also something else, ready. For the next week, Evelyn became a shadow in her own house. She smiled when Emily spoke, nodded when Michael repeated his wife's words, kept her voice soft, her head lowered. To anyone watching, she looked more submissive than ever. But inside, she carried Patrick's instructions like a secret weapon. Every morning, she slipped her small notebook into her apron pocket. Each evening, she wrote down what she overheard, tiny details of money withdrawn, packages arriving, conversations that didn't include her. She learned to leave her phone recording on the kitchen counter while she stepped into the laundry room. At first, she doubted herself. Was this who she had become? A mother spying on her children, a woman recording whispers in her own home? But each time the guilt pricked her, she remembered Lily's birthday, the empty wallet, the humiliation of Emily's pitying smile. She remembered Michael's words, "You're stuck in the past." No, Evelyn thought. I'm not stuck, I'm fighting. One Thursday afternoon, she stood at the sink rinsing dishes, her phone resting silently on the counter behind her. Emily's voice carried from the living room, low but animated, speaking into her own phone. Once Evelyn's out of the picture, the house is ours, Emily said, her words sharp, confident. Michael already agrees, he just won't admit it to her face. It's only a matter of time before she signs something without even realizing. Evelyn froze, her hands submerged in soapy water. Her chest tightened as she listened, heart pounding against her ribs. Emily laughed, a sound that cut through Evelyn like glass. We'll get Jacob on board too, he's easy. He trusts Michael with everything. Once we have his signature, there's nothing she can do. We'll have the deed, the assets, everything. And if she resists, there are facilities. You know, places for people like her. Michael's cousin in Denver runs one. It'll look like we're just concerned about her health. By then, she won't have a say. The room blurred. Evelyn gripped the edge of the sink to steady herself, her knuckles white. Facilities. They were planning to put her in a home. To strip her not only of her money and her house, but of her freedom. Her heart ached, not just from the betrayal of her daughter-in-law's cruelty, but from the quiet agreement of her son. Michael, her Michael, who once pressed dandelions into her palm and said, "For you, Mom." When Emily hung up, Evelyn forced herself to breathe evenly. She turned off the faucet, dried her hands, and picked up her phone as if nothing had happened. Inside, she was trembling, but the recording was there. Proof. That night, she played the audio back in her bedroom with the door locked, Richard's photograph watching from the nightstand. The voice was clear, undeniable. Emily's words, spoken with venom and certainty. Michael's complicity, revealed in a few careless sentences. Tears burned Evelyn's eyes as she whispered to the photograph. "You were right, Richard. I can't let them take what's ours." For the first time in months, she felt something powerful stir beneath her grief. Not just sorrow, not just fear, but anger forged into resolve. This was no longer about survival. It was about war. Evelyn didn't call her children right away. She waited, just as Patrick had told her. Wait until you have enough proof, until you can't be dismissed as paranoid or old. She kept recording. She collected bank statements Emily had left on the counter, receipts for expensive dinners she had never attended, transfers she had never approved. By the end of the week, Evelyn had a folder tucked beneath her mattress. A quiet arsenal. One evening, after Emily and Michael left for a dinner meeting, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with her phone in hand. Her finger hovered over Sophie's number. She hadn't called her daughter in months, not since their last conversation ended with Sophie sighing. "Mom, you always think the worst of people." But this time was different. The line rang twice before Sophie answered. "Mom, is everything okay?" Evelyn swallowed. "I need you to come home." There was silence on the other end. "Why? What happened?" "I can't explain on the phone. Just please, Sophie, it's important. I need you to see for yourself." Another pause, then Sophie sighed. "I'll come this weekend." When Evelyn hung up, her hands were shaking. She whispered to Richard's photo, "She's coming. Finally, she'll see." Saturday afternoon, Sophie walked through the front door, her hair pulled back, her city coat draped over her arm. She looked older than Evelyn remembered, harder somehow. But when she saw her mother, she frowned. "Mom, you've lost weight." She set her bag down and hugged her quickly. "What's going on?" Evelyn led her into the kitchen, closed the door, and pulled out her phone. "I need you to listen." Sophie leaned against the counter, arms crossed, her skeptical expression ready. Evelyn pressed play. Emily's voice filled the room, smooth and cruel. "Once Evelyn's out of the picture, the house is ours. If she resists, there are facilities. Michael's cousin in Denver runs one." The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Sophie's arms dropped to her sides, her mouth parted. "That," her voice caught. "That was Emily?" Evelyn nodded, Sophie's eyes widened. "And Michael knew?" "Yes," Evelyn whispered. "He knew." For the first time in years, Sophie didn't argue. She didn't roll her eyes or accuse her mother of exaggerating. She just stood there pale, her chest rising and falling too quickly. "That witch." Sophie spat finally, her voice shaking. "And my brother, how could he?" She broke off, pressing a hand to her forehead. "Okay, okay, what do we do?" Evelyn exhaled slowly. Relief washed through her like sunlight breaking through clouds. "We don't do anything yet, but you believe me now?" Sophie's eyes filled with tears. She nodded. "I believe you, Mom." The next day, Jacob came home for Sunday dinner. Evelyn had asked him quietly on the phone. He arrived with a grocery bag in hand, still wearing his college hoodie, his face open and warm. At the table, Emily served the roast she had insisted on cooking. Conversation flowed, but Evelyn barely heard it. She waited until Emily excused herself to take a call in the living room, then she leaned close to Jacob. "Son," she whispered, "I need to show you something after dinner." He looked at her curiously, but nodded. Later, in her bedroom, Evelyn shut the door and pulled out the folder from beneath her mattress. She laid the papers out carefully, bank statements, receipts, notes, and finally the recording. Jacob listened, his eyes darkening with every word. When it ended, he sat very still. "Mom," he said slowly, "are you telling me they're trying to put you in a home, to steal the house?" Evelyn's throat ached as she nodded. Jacob pushed his chair back, standing abruptly. "No, no way, not while I'm here." His hands trembled, not with fear, but with anger. "Emily can't do this to you. And Michael?" He broke off, his voice tight. "I'll talk to him, I'll make him see." Evelyn touched his arm gently. "No, not yet. Patrick says we need to be patient. We need them to show their hand completely." Jacob frowned. "Patrick? Your father's old friend, a lawyer, he's helping me." For a moment, Jacob looked at her as though seeing her in a new light. Not as the tired mother he worried over, but as someone quietly fighting back. "Okay," he said firmly. "Then I'm with you. Whatever you need, I'm here." Evelyn reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. For the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. Sophie and Jacob were with her now, and that meant Emily and even Michael would no longer be facing a quiet, isolated widow. They would be facing a mother with allies. The following week felt like the longest of Evelyn's life. Every time Emily breezed into the kitchen with her too sweet smile, every time Michael repeated her words as if they were gospel, Evelyn bit down on her fury and waited. Patrick's advice echoed in her mind: patience. Let them believe they've won until they can't deny what you hold in your hands. On Friday evening, the house was full. Evelyn had insisted on a family dinner, claiming she missed the old days. Sophie flew in again, Jacob was already home, and Michael arrived late from work, Emily at his side, their laughter trailing behind them as they walked in. The table was set simply: roast chicken, potatoes, green beans, the way Richard used to like it. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, her children around her. For a moment, as the plates clinked and the smell of butter filled the air, it almost felt like family again. Almost. When the dishes were cleared, Evelyn folded her napkin carefully, her hands steady. She looked at Michael first, then Emily. "There's something we need to talk about," she said softly. Michael frowned. "Mom, can this wait? It's been a long week." "No," Evelyn interrupted. Her voice was calm but final. "It can't." Sophie leaned forward, her eyes sharp. Jacob sat rigid, his jaw tight. Emily glanced between them, suspicion flickering in her gaze. Evelyn reached beneath her chair and pulled out the folder. She placed it on the table, sliding it toward the center. The room grew quiet. "What's this?" Michael asked, his voice uneasy. "Proof," Evelyn said simply. Emily let out a short laugh. "Proof of what? That you don't trust us?" Evelyn didn't answer. She pressed play on her phone. Emily's own voice filled the room, cold and certain. "Once Evelyn's out of the picture, the house is ours. If she resists, there are facilities. Michael's cousin in Denver runs one." The words hung heavy in the air. Michael's face drained of color. Jacob's hands curled into fists. Sophie's eyes blazed. Michael turned slowly toward his wife. "Emily, tell me that isn't you." Emily stiffened. "It's edited." She twisted it. Sophie slammed her hand on the table. "Don't you dare lie, we all heard it." Jacob stood. "You plan to put our mother in a home like she's some burden? After everything she's done for us." Emily's cheeks flushed red. "I was protecting all of you. She's fragile. She can't handle things anymore. Look at her." Evelyn rose from her chair, her voice sharp as glass. "Look at me, Emily. Do I look fragile to you? I buried my husband. I raised 3 children on my own. I worked until my bones ached to put food on this table. And you," she pointed at Emily, her hands steady, "you tried to erase me in my own home." Michael buried his face in his hands. "God," he whispered, "what have I done?" Emily grabbed his arm. "Michael, don't listen to her. She's manipulating you. We're a team, remember? Everything I did was for us." Michael shook her off violently, his voice breaking. "No, you did it for yourself. You made me betray my own mother." The room was thick with silence. Evelyn's chest rose and fell, her eyes never leaving her son's face. Finally, Michael looked at her, his expression shattered. "Mom, I'm sorry." His voice cracked. "I let her convince me you were weak, that you didn't need the house. That you didn't need," he choked on the words. "I failed you." Evelyn's throat tightened, but she stood tall. "You failed yourself too, Michael, but you still have a choice right now." Jacob slid the folder across the table to his brother. "It's all here: bank statements, transfers, the proof of what she's been doing behind your back. Are you going to keep looking away?" Michael stared at the papers, his face pale. He whispered, "No." Then louder, trembling, "No, not anymore." Emily stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're all insane. She's turning you against me. You'll regret this." But her words fell flat against the weight of the truth. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice cold and clear. "The only one who will regret anything here, Emily, is you. This house is mine, my life is mine, and I will not be erased." For the first time, Emily had no reply. The storm Evelyn had feared for so long had finally broken. And though the pieces lay scattered across the table, she knew this was only the beginning of her fight. The house was silent after Emily stormed upstairs. No one moved, no one spoke. The air was thick with everything that had just been said, with everything that could never be unsaid. Michael sat slumped at the table, his head buried in his hands. Sophie's eyes were still sharp with fury. Jacob's fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. Evelyn stood tall, though her body trembled with the weight of it all. Minutes later, Emily came down with two suitcases. She didn't look at anyone as she dragged them across the floor. At the door, she finally turned, her face twisted with anger. "You'll regret this, Evelyn," she spat. "You'll all regret this." Evelyn met her gaze calmly. "The only thing I regret is letting you into this house." With that, Emily yanked open the door and disappeared into the night. The slam echoed through the walls. Michael let out a broken sob. He looked up at his mother, his eyes red, his face pale. "Mom, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I stood by and let her take everything from you. I let her make me blind. I betrayed you." Evelyn's heart ached at the sight of him. Her son, the boy she had once carried in her arms, now kneeling in shame before her. She reached out and touched his shoulder gently. "You forgot who you were, Michael, but you see it now. That's what matters." He shook his head. "No, it's not enough. I'll spend the rest of my life making this right. If you'll let me." Sophie leaned forward, her voice softer now. "Mom, we'll help you put everything back together. Whatever Emily did, we'll undo it. You won't face this alone anymore." Jacob nodded firmly. "We'll protect you the way you've always protected us." For the first time in years, Evelyn felt something she thought she had lost: safety. Not because the danger was gone, but because she was no longer fighting alone. She looked around the table Richard had built with his own hands, and saw not the fractures of betrayal, but the fragile beginnings of healing. "Then we start tomorrow," she said quietly. "We take back what's ours, piece by piece." Her children nodded, determination etched in their faces. That night, Evelyn walked through the house slowly. She touched the walls, the photographs, the furniture that remained. It was bruised, scarred, but still hers. She stood by the window where Richard's chair sat empty. And for the first time, she didn't feel alone beside it. She whispered into the quiet, "We kept it, Richard. We kept our home." And in her heart, she felt his answer, steady as ever: "That's my girl." Rose, dear reader, thank you for walking with me through this story of a mother's strength, her sacrifices, and her fight to keep her dignity. Families are not always easy, and sometimes the deepest wounds come from those we love most. But love, when it is true, always finds a way back. I wish you and your family health, peace, and happiness. May your home always be filled with respect, kindness, and love. With gratitude, the author.